I would like to tell you a story this morning, a true story, about a man's life, as much as I have been able to uncover. His name is Fritz Kunkel, and the slide shows the only picture I've been able to find of him. I heard his name when I first came to Questhaven in the 1970s. And as the years went by, and I heard Flower speak of him in many of her talks, I became more curious. Who is this man? And when my husband and I stayed in El Deseo one Easter retreat weekend, I found his name and his signature and a message of thanks in the guest book there, so I knew he had been to Questhaven. I attributed my desire to know more about him to my curiosity, because I'm a very curious person. My expectation was that I might find a little history about him on Wikipedia, and I had 2 books from the Questhaven Library. I wasn't sure I would find enough to fill an entire talk. Turns out I was so wrong about everything. Once I delved into the story of this man's life, I began to suspect that someone in the inner realms much higher than me was urging me to bring Fritz Kunkel's teachings to Questhaven once again. And I'm pretty sure I will be speaking about him in future talks. So today I'd like to tell you a little bit about his life and his work. He was born in 1889 in the northwestern part of Germany near Berlin, and he came into a fairly well-to-do family, and they had a large estate there, and it's said that he had a fairly idyllic childhood there. He attended medical school in Munich, and he received his medical degree just a few days after the beginning of World War I. He served in the armed forces at the Battle of Verdun in France as a battalion surgeon. He received a shrapnel wound, and he thought he was dying. He had a mystical experience, and he found everything was totally connected and totally beautiful, and this was in war. Now, no one has said this, and I haven't read it anywhere, but I suspect his mystical experience could have been a near-death experience because it seemed to change the trajectory of his life. He also had, during that time, a special experience with a man named Jesus, and that adds to my suspicion that it may have been a near-death experience. The wound led to the loss of an arm, and he focused on Jesus and the words in Matthew 10:39, "He that findeth his life will lose it, and he that loses his life for my sake will find it." So he started as a battalion surgeon, working on the physical body, but he transferred to the psychological, the spirit, and the mind. Around 1919, he moved to Vienna, Austria, where he studied with psychiatrist Alfred Adler, and later co-founded with his first wife, Ruth Loengard, the Adler Institute of Berlin, and they had 3 children. Alfred Adler is considered one of the 3 founders of psychotherapy, along with Freud and Jung. Dr. Kunkel also is said to have studied the work of both Freud and Jung. And Adler's emphasis was on the importance of the feelings of belonging. He looked in his patients a feeling of community, an orientation to live cooperatively with others, and a lifestyle that valued the common good above one's own interests and desires. And that really resonated with Fritz Kunkel, and he used a lot of that throughout his life. But Dr. Kunkel also developed his own theory of character development that he called we psychology. After his wife Ruth passed in 1932, he married Elizabeth Jensen, another psychotherapist, and had 2 children. After Hitler came to power, Kunkel planned to immigrate with his family to the United States. He had been invited by the Quakers to do a lecture tour in America in 1936, and then he was invited again in 1939. And he came over for the lecture tour, but when war broke out in September of 1939, World War II, he was unable to return to Germany to get his family. And actually, I read in one place that he really wasn't able to hear from them all during the war, so he didn't know the status of their health or well-being. His older sons came first to America, and finally his whole family was reunited here in 1947. And I believe they lived in the Los Angeles area. In America, Dr. Kunkel led a very active life, writing, lecturing, and doing psychotherapy. He was referred to by one scholar as a social scientist whose goal was to integrate psychology, sociology, and religion. He was asked to join the church of the staff of the First Congregational Church in Los Angeles to counsel them. And he was very popular. They liked his merry smile. They even liked his German accent. And he seemed like a wonderfully warm and loving person. I don't know for sure how Flower and Lawrence became acquainted with Dr. Kunkel. Gordon thought there was a possibility that a colleague of Dr. Kunkel's knew of Flower's works and may have introduced that to Dr. Kunkel. In the early days of Questhaven, often the services were held in Vista. I think at the Vista Women's Club, but I'm not sure where. And I received a document from Blake about a talk given there by Dr. Kunkel in January of 1947, so we know that he was connected with Flower as early as 1947. And the talk was about psychology and religion. And then a few days later, I received a document from Richard Wold about what happened with that talk, how that talk went. And this is the next slide. Dr. Fritz Kunkel, the eminent psychiatrist who wrote What Do You Advise?, Let's Be Normal, and other widely read books, was the guest speaker at the Christ Word Ministry's Vista services on January 19, 1947. He spoke to a more than capacity audience. Many people were turned away due to lack of standing room. His subject was psychology and religion. We are pleased to report that Dr. Kunkel is a splendid and impassioned speaker, one who possesses the humility of a truly great soul. We recommend his writings to all seeking help in self-analysis or self-mastery. That sounds a lot like Flower to me. Sadly, Fritz Kunkel passed unexpectedly and suddenly on Easter Sunday, 1956, and he was only 66 years old.